So, welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews, where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes, their challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this morning, I'm delighted to have with us Rebecca Baxter, who's Managing Director at NEUPC. So, firstly, Rebecca, thank you for spending a bit of time with us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, NEUPC, what you do, how you help people, that would be wonderful.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. So I'm managing director of a company called NEUPC. So that stands for Northeastern Universities Purchasing Consortium. So essentially, we are um, a procurement organisation that brings together particularly higher education, so universities, but also wider public sector leverage. So what we do for our members is we collate their needs, their buying power, and create a range of collaborative framework agreements, which is designed to maximise their expenditure and bring the right deals for them and their needs and their universities. But alongside that, because we've got such a great relationship with our universities, we also provide other services. So we look at how we can help them purchase sustainably. We look at how we can change and innovate with them and their needs and work with the supply base. So very much that linkage between all the universities, creating that network, but also then looking wider in terms of the supply base and how we can help them manage their risk and resilience, particularly for universities now, because they're going through quite a change in their sector and understanding how we can continue to help them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's this real power of the collective, isn't it? Really means you can give great value back. And so, I mean, what obviously you said higher education. What are the range of products and services that you actually procure for your members?
So it can be anything. I mean, we're doing one now for furniture. So universities need desks and chairs, lab equipment, things for, for their halls. So we're doing one for furniture, but then that can move right across to estates, construction, building, refurbing the buildings that they've got. So a real wide range of,
Wow.
professional services, the more hands-on elements, legal services.
Yes.
So essentially anything where we can see the connection between their spend. So what we can see is what all the universities are spending on. So we collate all of that information and kind
Yeah.
of look for where those patterns are. And if we think there's some opportunity there to pull that together and create something that can really drive value for them, then that's what we'll do. So there's always that element of collective procurement that we manage, but the institutions also look at things and say, actually, we can do that better on our own. So it's understanding the balance of where
Yes.
they can procure better on their own and where we need to have that collective focus and strategic view.
That makes sense. Makes perfect sense. So maybe Rebecca, if we start just looking backwards a little while, could you tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into business, and why this particular one for you?
Yeah, so um, I've always worked in procurement. So I think since leaving university, I think I've always had a procurement focus in any career I've in. And I actually started back in the steel industry. Very northern. Probably most of us have worked at some point or other in the steel industry, and I'm certainly no different. So I left university, and I wasn't really sure which way I was going to go in terms of a career path. And a junior buy role came up at, I think it would have been Chorus at the time, um,
Yep.
and joined there. So I worked there for about 13 years before looking for a new opportunity, and then kind of discovered the public sector. So moved into housing, and it was a great housing organisation, a local housing organisation for I think 6 or 7 years, and then more recently. Wanted to sort of expand my procurement sector experience and really looked at the university sector, which is where I am now. So I think from my perspective, I've done, like you say, quite a lot of procurement. And I think in recent years, started to expand that a little bit wider into more of a governance and performance management role, and really pick that up at the housing association that I was working for. And I think for me, it was just really building upon that. I really enjoyed that governance element. I liked, leading a bit more strategic direction of an organisation. So when the opportunity came up to be MD of any UPC, it essentially combines both of those. It combines procurement, which is the core of what we do, with having that more governance and strategic view. So I've been there around 8 months now and really settling in and really enjoying sort of taking charge and sort of really trying to drive home the procurement agenda in an organisation. So it's kind of been a perfect fit for me.
Brilliant, brilliant. And when you were growing up, is this the sort of thing you saw yourself doing, or did you have other plans and goals at that point?
Do you know what? I'd be surprised if anybody in procurement now ever said that they, from a
Yes.
small child, wanted to be in procurement, because I think I'm probably not alone in saying we didn't know what procurement was.
Yeah.
I think up until university, didn't really understand what procurement did in an organisation. I think I always knew I wanted to organise, research. I really like delving into the details. So I kind of knew that's where I wanted to be, but what that
Yeah.
career path took, I wasn't sure. So once I went to university, I studied history and kind of looking at lots of different opportunities, and then fell, as I think most people do, into a procurement role, and then discovered how wide-ranging
Yes.
and exciting it can be as a career path, and like I say, never moved away from it then.
No, absolutely brilliant. And looking back over your career, what are some of the biggest challenges and issues you've had to overcome?
I think from a, well, I suppose two lines that from a personal perspective, I think in all that time, I've had a bit of a growing family. I've now got two young children, so trying to navigate that from working full
Yes.
time,
Yes.
quite difficult. But I feel like we're a bit of a path of getting used to that and sort of managing that. So that was a bit of a change for me. But I think from a like a work perspective, I think seeing that rise of procurement from being fairly transactional and not and almost seen as the Barry or the police of a business. I think I joined an organisation that very much that's where we were. We really grew that to have fighting to get a seat at like a senior leadership table and
Yes.
showing the true benefit of procurement. And I think constantly having to go and prove yourself all the time, it's been a huge challenge and an issue, but one that actually we've enjoyed fighting.
Yeah.
And really seeing procurement become almost like a bit of a powerhouse within an organisation and people seeing that. And I think most organisations now are really seeing that benefit. And I'm seeing that when I talk to people about procurement. Whereas I think, 10, 15 years ago, that really wasn't the place that we were in. So I think it's been lovely to see that. But I think people underestimate the fight that procurement professionals have had to get
Yes.
that view and getting, to talk to senior people in an organisation to talk about it.
Yes, no, that makes sense. And I just think about it from I probably do a lot more work from a sales perspective with business organizations. I'm keen to know what tips you might have for a sales team in terms of to associate better with procurement in general. What makes a good approach and what makes a poor one?
I think it's interesting from a procurement perspective. I think we get, and procurement are just as guilty of it. We kind of focus on what you want at that moment. So it's almost saying, I'm getting my bids. I want a product or a service, and your conversation gets really funneled into that.
Yes,
Whereas actually, if we spend the time building the relationships, and procurement are just as guilty as not wanting to do this as probably your sales teams, is building that relationship up front and having the conversation about, what's innovative about that product or that service, how is it moving forward, so that the point that you get to the procurement focus bit, so that I want to buy something or contract something. It's almost then taking all of that knowledge and saying, actually, we can see a journey for it
great.
and not just having that relationship at that moment. I think trying to
Yes,
keep the relationship open at all points and really, like I say, thinking about what that market's doing, how it's moving forward. But like you say, procurement are just as guilty at being so busy
yes,
that they just focus on that moment as well. And I think it's for the sort of senior group to say, actually, no, we do need to step back and really
yes.
drive that conversation. So I think for salespeople, it's almost saying try to get around a procurement person at the point that they really want to talk about innovation, not just talk about the product at that point.
Yes, that's really good. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I almost always say to any business I work with is that I've never been into a business where all of its customers bought all of its services that had a need for them. Obviously, sometimes you don't have that because primarily my belief is at the point at which a procurement is made, that's the focus. So from a sales perspective, not putting blame anywhere, but from a sales perspective, I say, look, you might be really good at making everyone aware of all the things we can do at that point. But if the focus is on this product, then the other things tend to go by the wayside and don't even sit in memory. So the repetitive building of a relationship and making sure people are aware of, as you said, both the range and the innovation in the range is quite important.
I think it's focusing. I think you're right. At that moment, the focus is that product. But I
Yes,
think once you've had a really good engagement around one product, you're pushing a little bit more at an open door. I think it's
right.
really difficult for sales teams to be pushing it as a group of products or services if there isn't a need in that business at that moment. But I think the second the need is there, it's then saying, right, we've done a really great job. We've delivered on time. We've done everything we needed to do in that moment. What I'm going to do is use that as the way to say, actually, this product can, there's innovation in that product
Great,
line, or it naturally links to something else. And I think really understanding the business that they're selling to and
great.
understanding the needs and potentially where that business is going to say, actually, I can focus my sales opportunities in a direction that you need, not just give you like I said, a brochure that you can pick up anywhere.
Brilliant, brilliant. So what I'm hearing a little bit, just to say to help anyone that in sales that's watching this, it is it's the follow up and the continued relationship building is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no doubt that that is incredibly difficult. I think,
Yes.
and I'm sure a lot of salespeople say, we do that. And the procurement teams immediately go, oh, I've had my product, see you later. And I think it's just constantly doing that. And sometimes it's just right place, right time.
Yeah,
So I think if you're always in the thought process and you're always there kind of feeling like you're being a bit of a pain, but actually at the right moment, that procurement team will say, oh, remember,
yeah,
that guy comes in, he's always providing a really good service. We actually do need something there. And the right procurement teams that are thinking strategically will remember those people.
brilliant, brilliant. And so, what would you say your biggest learnings are about business in general? What are the sort of key factors for you?
I think for me, it's probably, and I think, like I say, most people would understand this now, but it goes back to people for me.
Yeah,
I think having the right team, I think most businesses, their structure and how they work, people understand that, certain businesses work and people understand how that works and what that structure is. But I think if you've got the right people, you can really make that something brilliant. So I think for me, it's always surrounding yourself with, honest, really passionate people about what they do, but also that add to your skill set. I think it's so easy
yes,
to hire people that are you, another version of you, and have the same skill set. Whereas actually, you really need to be conscious of what do you need that you're potentially not as strong at. So
yeah,
recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses and saying, actually, I'm going to surround myself with people that really complement that, but also challenge me and make me
yes,
think differently because it's so easy for me to think, well, actually, no, I know which direction I want to go in and like, let's power through. But actually having somebody there with a little bit of a different perspective, it's worth its weight in gold, I think, sometimes. And having that and being open-minded to the fact that, you've got a team with a really good skill set. And again, building that relationship with everyone around you. I think businesses thrive on a relationship. So every stakeholder, every supplier that you're engaged with, it's trying to build that relationship, whatever maturity model that needs to be on, but
yeah.
making sure it's there, for me is probably the things that have always stood me in good stead.
Yeah, brilliant. It reminds me, I was doing some leadership management training last week, and one of the things we talked about very strongly was it's the job of a leader and an effective manager to encourage difference of opinion, because difference of
Yeah.
opinion is where innovation comes from. It also makes sure we're looking at this situation from all angles. Whereas, as you say, if we're not, if we've got like-minded people, we tend to just get groupthink where everyone sort of agrees. That sounds like a nice environment, but it's not particularly innovative or effective. Or
Yeah, it's strange. We were just having this exact conversation at our last full organizational meeting, and we were talking about like the six hat theories, where you need to have people with a different thought process or with a different view. And if you don't have, that logical mind, the leader, the creative thinker, the guy that's saying, actually, I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate here and talk about the risks. You need those people in the room, and you might not particularly want those people in the room, but you do need them. And if you think that you're missing one of those hats, it's
yep,
making sure someone's in that room and say, you're going to take that hat on because you're potentially going to miss opportunity. And probably more importantly, you're potentially going to miss risks if you're too
yes.
focused in one area. And I think that's a real strong area. Sometimes you might think I've missed an opportunity. I'd rather miss an opportunity than miss a risk.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good, a really important point, isn't it? It's the risk side as well. It's and it's for, I guess it's interesting as a coach or a business coach. One of the things we describe ourselves as is an unreasonable friend in business. Part of our role working with business leaders is to challenge, not to disagree, but just to challenge the evidence behind a belief or a way forward. If that makes
And
sense.
challenging in the right way, I think. I think
Yeah,
people almost read challenge as aggression,
yeah,
and
no,
it's not that. It's absolutely saying, we can see the strategy or that, the idea that you've got. And actually, we're not poking holes in it. What we're doing is, we're really focusing on it and testing it.
Yeah,
And I think that test is important, but like I say, it's about sharing it in the right way and receiving it in the right way. And I think if you've got a team that don't necessarily like that challenge, that can be quite difficult.
yes.
And it's something that, you do really need to foster.
I think it's important to have. I'm trying to think. Kim Scott uses the phrase about caring. Is care passionately? I think she says. She talks about. There's a great book called Radical Candor, which is
Yes, I've heard of that. Yeah.
yeah, it's creating an environment where people feel comfortable expressing their thoughts. But the most successful part of that is when there's also the environment of caring deeply about the person you're challenging or giving feedback to. Because if you don't, it can be seen in her words as obnoxious aggression, which
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to that relationship building, doesn't it? I think if you're distant from your team or from a supplier and the only time you get involved is to potentially have a challenging conversation or say something negative, you probably do fall more into that obnoxious category. Whereas if you're having, you know, you've got that relationship built up and you can have those positive messages, I think, like you say, you can kind of turn it on its head and understand how that person might want to receive that message. I think it's really important to understand what type of personality that person is and so as to how they will receive that message. Because one person's, I don't know, radical candor, it may be received as, like say, obnoxious. To another, and depending on how they receive that message, I think it's really understanding your group and the individuals in that group as well.
absolutely. I mean, I'm picking up from your language that you're a very people-oriented person, and therefore yeah, that's a very different behavioural profile to someone that's very task-oriented, where communication tends to be very fact-based and even blunt to the point of potential rudeness in if we're not careful. And it's just understanding for both categories of how do I deliver this information in the way the other person wants to receive it. But I think it's also the other person saying, if I'm receiving this information, if it's not given to me in the way actually I totally would like it, it's okay in some situations, if that makes sense.
And I think that's just because, yeah, I probably am fairly people oriented now, but that's probably from a personality type. That's probably not necessarily where I was. I was always
Right.
that very when you do all your assessments, I'm very logical, want
Yep.
to drive into the detail, kind of very fact oriented. And I think it's just over my career
Yes.
realizing that I need to take that and add the people side. So I think
Yep.
fairly strong on the people side now, but I've had to learn that. And I think,
Yes.
like I say, recognizing where potentially your natural personality needs that additional engagement. And I think for me, it was, like I say, it was that people side.
It's I think it's the difference between identity and behavior. Identity is relatively fixed. It can be developed over time, but behavior is quite modifiable to the situation. So we can be people in one circumstance, be fact and task in another, and it's just understanding that we can. And I've seen I think the most effective sort of managers are the ones that can move between the different styles very easily to fit the need, if that works.
Yeah. No, it's a fascinating area. I think every time you read
Yeah.
into it or look at it, it sort of pulls up different ways of thinking. I think it's something to keep on top of. I think like I say, it's an area that's always changing.
Absolutely. And I think you're aware we're a business coaching organisation. I'm keen to know who the best coaches you've worked with, whether that's business, sport, life in general. Who's had the biggest impact on you?
I think for me, probably not necessarily a coach, although I feel like that person acted like it is probably early in my career. I had a manager within the steel industry who happens to be sort of one of my closest friends now, but she was really great at encouraging me to get out of my comfort zone. And I think it
Right.
wasn't necessarily her, she was a direct manager of mine at the time, but it wasn't necessarily that managing role. It was the fact that she recognized where I held back or where
Yeah,
I didn't want to push forward and very much encouraged me to get out of that comfort zone. And I think it was having that sense that you can try new ideas and take risk with having that support network behind you that really helped me.
brilliant.
And knowing that you could almost put yourself into a position where you were taking either a personal or a business risk, but you had that, like you said, that support network and you had the facts and figures behind you to be able to go and do that. And I think for me, it probably taught me a lot about how I wanted to manage and coach people moving forward. So I think, like I said, that early manager for a young sort of 20 odd year old, having somebody like that as your manager with sort of,
Wonderful.
I think it was worth its weight in gold.
Absolutely wonderful. Because I think that the most successful organizations and teams is when where there is that safety in innovation. It's it's the reverse of a blame culture, isn't it? Where where you do something, it's just slight mistake, and everyone wants to have an autopsy on it. It's like we need the freedom to be able to try things in a relatively controlled environment and lower risk. We mentioned risk earlier, but
Yeah,
if you've got that environment, then you're going to get innovation, you're going to get growth, you're going to get success.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
And I love picking up quotes and sayings. Is there any favorite quotes or sayings you catch yourself using a lot about business or success in general?
I'm not sure it's one I normally admit to, I suppose. Um, the only one that comes to mind, and taken in the right context,
Yes.
is probably it's better to ask for forgiveness than seek permission. But from a procurement context, and within the limits of your role to give it um, some structure, I think sometimes, especially from a procurement perspective, you sometimes need to push on and prove a concept
Yeah.
without because we're always told no, or as a you might be said, the business leaders might say, "Oh, I don't think that's a direction we're going in." And I think sometimes you kind of just have to take the bull by the horn and say, "I'm going to move a little bit further within the confines of my role to be able to prove a concept or to be able to prove that it's the right way to go, to prove that we should use that new product because it shows innovation." But potentially as a business, we're a little bit risk averse. I think sometimes pushing slightly forward to prove a concept is always worth doing. And I think I've found when you do that in the right way, you don't even need to ask for forgiveness. But sometimes having that concept in your mind to think, actually, I've been told no, but I think there's something in that, and I'm going to, you know,
Brilliant.
at the side try and do something. So I probably hold that one. That's probably the one I think of the most. I'm not sure it's one I'd, commend to everybody, but I think in the
No,
right context, it's the right thing to think about.
I think in the right context, and it's the same sort of line along the same lines as that innovative approach, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
Is that it's okay. Oh, I'll just try a little bit more, and it's stretching these boundaries. I think is where the real value is in growth, in success in general. And
absolutely.
do you have any favorite books or podcasts that you read or watch about business or success that you could recommend?
I think the only two I've read, and I'm going to have to struggle to remember their names, might have to find out after. So I've read one around, I think the 5 minute meeting or death by meetings. So I think it's and you'll probably have read it. I think it's very well known. So there's that one around using meetings in the right way. Don't just have a
Yes,
meeting for meeting's sake.
brilliant.
Yeah, I think they talk about weekly tacticals and the strategic monthlies, and I really believe in that, and it's something we've put into our organisation around making sure that if you're in it, the reason for a meeting is to make a decision. So if you're sat there
Yes,
just talking, you're
bang on,
not, it's not the point. That's not what you're there for. You're
bang
there
on.
to really drive forward. And it's something I really passionate about in terms of making sure that, like I say, the meetings we have are focused. If we're meeting as a group and a team monthly, it's because we're going to do something as a team. So, like I say, we talked about the six hats thinking and about our own personality styles, but we also talked about how the business is growing. We talked about our quarter three performance, and it was things that we really
Brilliant.
needed to learn as a group. But every
Yes.
week, individual groups also meet to say, actually, what is the thing that I need to do this week?
Yeah.
And what support do I need? So it's really focused. And I think that's really shown some benefit. The other one that I would probably mention is the sumo guy.
Oh, sumo,
Quite,
yes.
yes.
Um,
So I quite like, I
Paul,
was recommended that years ago. And sort of read that. And I think just that mentality of, don't be a victim, move on and, pick yourself up and sort of absolutely in the right way and protecting yourself. But think about how to move forward. Don't stand in one place. And I think again that concept I think really sort of speaks a lot to me.
yeah, brilliant. Yeah, for those listening to this, the sumo stands for shut up and move on, I think is the from
Yes.
memory the acronym. Yeah, I've heard him speak as Paul, I can't remember, many years ago, but very effective. Just that mechanism of, yeah, take it on. I guess it comes back to things like the Stoics and stuff, is accepting where we are, being a function of our actions and decisions, and therefore taking it on the chin and moving on, which is
Yeah, and I think it's a great way to think and believe. And like you say, it's almost saying don't be afraid to stop and grieve or to process. That's absolutely fine, but don't stay in that spot.
no,
Keep
no.
keep moving forward. And I think, yeah, just a great life lesson, I think sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of learning, what would you say you've learned about yourself throughout your journey so far, Rebecca?
Um, I think, like I say, I've always been quite a logical, fact-based person. And I think actually understanding about, being open-minded to a situation and bringing that logical approach, I think sometimes you do need that in the room, along with all the ideas and building that up and be tenacious when you need to be. I think sometimes we get told no, or someone's, not keen on a way or a way forward. And I think just, like you say, keeping that relationship building it and sort of working on, especially if you really believe in it, keep going, keep being tenacious. And I think for me, just having confidence in my own skills,
Yep.
recognizing that when you sat at the table, you're there for a reason.
Yep.
And even if you think what you're saying isn't of importance or isn't covering everything, just speak because people value the value that you bring, even if you don't think that you're adding it at that point.
Absolutely. It's like, you are there for a reason, therefore your opinion should count. And if you're not, you shouldn't be there. So it's like,
Exactly.
it's important that we feel empowered to say what we think. And going back to what we talked about earlier, that challenge, if what we're saying is opposite to some of the things already being said, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think it's embracing that. It's like you say, it's not seen as a challenge or not seen as a disagreement with your thought process. It's actually just adding that other perspective in. I think sometimes you can come to a very different conclusion if you're willing to have
Yes.
sort of that dialogue and that engagement instead of taking it personally that potentially someone isn't 100% on board with your idea.
We get it a lot in the work that we do is we encourage people to disagree or at the very least question purely because it may be that they're trying to find their way through because when someone actually says something that can be considered negative like well that wouldn't work or they're actually trying to process how it might work, it's just they can't quite get there yet, so it's really
I
important
think
to
it's just a
encourage.
yeah. I was just saying it's really British of us, isn't it? We almost don't like to argue, and then we almost apologise for having a bad idea. And I think it's getting past that maybe
Getting
that
past that.
cultural element that we have of saying, dialogue. It's not argument, it's a dialogue, and that's okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so looking forward, Rebecca, what does the future look like for you guys and what challenges do you think you might face, if any?
Yeah, so I think the university sector, like so higher education, is seeing a big change at the minute. They're going through their own transformation, which potentially other public sector bodies have already been through. So they're really seeing a change in the way they need to operate, particularly with, some of the changes coming through from international students coming to this country to study, some of the challenges that universities may have financially in the future. So I think they are going through that transformation phase. And I think for us and for procurement teams across all the universities, it's really a time to try and change and shine, I suppose, a little bit for
Yeah,
procurement and see where we can navigate the changing sector, seeking out those opportunities and trying to make some smart decisions. But I think being a little bit bolder to say we can see the opportunity. There's always opportunities, and I think universities are just one of the public sector bodies that are starting to go through this change, and probably learning from some of the other sectors like housing potentially that have already been through it, like the steel industry that's probably transformed a
yes,
million times over the last years, and using those sector lessons
yep,
to do that. So I think where we're adding value as NEUPC is we come from lots of backgrounds. Like say, I've got steel industry and housing in one belt, and the team come from lots of different backgrounds, and being able to think a little bit differently and offer those opportunities and sort of really being there for universities. But I think from a procurement perspective, I think sometimes when you're going through a transformation, that's where procurement can shine and
yep,
show that they've got the skill sets to look across lots of different areas, and probably one of the only elements of a business procurement, probably HR is another one where you see every bit of the business,
yep,
you understand what their needs are, whereas each other area of the business is probably quite siloed and understanding what they want, whereas procurement sits across all of that. So I think adding that insight um, in is really useful and not again not being afraid to say we can see all of these networks and how does that add value, and we've got a unique opportunity there. So I think it's an interesting time for universities, and I think whilst it might be challenging, I think people also need to see it as an opportunity for change and to do something a bit differently.
yeah, and it changes constantly, and that's the key thing, isn't it? And therefore, the organisations that are comfortable with change are going to be the ones that continue to thrive because it never
Absolutely.
changes. I heard a story about Tony Benn, Lord Benn, the ex-Labour peer, and apparently, and I don't know if this to be true, but when he retired from politics, he did quite a lot of speaking. He was quite often invited to universities to speak. And apparently he'd always start his speech with, "We all wake up in the morning knowing less than we did the day before," which obviously caused great consternation in amongst the lecturers and the people at the university.
Yeah.
But his point was the amount of information available in the world is growing so fast that our proportion of it, unfortunately, is always going to be less. But that shouldn't stop us striving to try and keep up with it.
Yeah. No, I hope that's true, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a great concept to have. And I think, like you say, like you say, now technology is moving so fast. It's almost embracing that side of it as well. And said, we can't keep up. So, using technology wisely to be able to give us that insight is really important. And like you say, keeping your eyes and ears open as to what's going on around.
absolutely. And keen to know what you'd say to anyone that was thinking of going into business right now.
I think my only thing, but I suppose my view in that is going into business is absolutely something. If you want to do it, is make sure you're doing it in something that you love and that you can be passionate about,
Great.
and you can grow it. Because I think it takes so much time and effort, and you need to have that constant belief in what you're doing.
Yep.
That, like you say, is to do it in something you love. I think me moving into this section, NEUPC was already a really established organisation when I joined it, but to be able to grow it and to move forward with it, it has to be in something you love. And for me, that's procurement. So it absolutely made sense that I moved into an organisation where procurement was its heart. And I think
Brilliant.
that would probably be where I see people moving into businesses. Don't just do it because you think you're potentially going to make money, or you're potentially going to have a route that it's a little bit different to having a 9 to 5 job, but you do have to love it and you
Yep.
have to want to see it grow and succeed.
Great advice. And finally, what would be the best advice you could give an 18-year-old you if you go back in time and do that?
Probably speak up, like you say, you sat at it doesn't matter what table you're at, you're invited to a meeting, you're invited to an event. Don't worry about what you're going to say or adding value. Just say something. It
Great.
doesn't matter what it is. And I think I've always gone with the idea of, and it's probably something I learned much later than 18, but if you walk into a room and you think you're going to be worried about speaking, say anything right at the beginning. Say morning to everybody, because speaking
Interesting.
anything means it's easier later on in that meeting when something of, real values coming up in discussion. It's easier to speak second, even if all you've done is say morning. It's much easier to speak later instead of waiting and waiting and waiting and then think, oh, I've not spoke all meeting. I'm now nervous. You've already got it out of the way right at the beginning.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, that's really useful. We often talk about imposter syndrome of
Mm,
feeling in the wrong room, and I often say, I think it's the entrepreneur Stephen Bartlett, the Diarist CEO guy, who says he loves imposter syndrome because it means he's in the right room and he's going to learn something. But I think
yeah.
adding to that, what you've just said of coming in and just starting to contribute from that very moment starts to break that tension, doesn't it? And you feel more, and we can feel more comfortable.
I
Right.
think you just visibly, yeah, I think you relax. I think as soon as you've spoken, the weight is off you in terms of the pressure of, you know,
Brilliant.
making sure that you're supposed to be in the room. At least say, even if it's something as simple as saying morning to everyone, how was your
Yes.
weekend? It just takes that pressure off. And then you can actually focus on the what the meete's about instead of
Brilliant.
focusing on, I haven't spoken. Should I still be sat here?
Love it. Yeah, no, I love that. I think yeah, that's really, really valuable. Well, Rebecca, it's been fascinating talking to you today. Thank you so much for your time. And for anyone that's interested in getting in touch with you or any UPC, what would be the best way of doing that?
So I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so just under Rebecca Baxter, but we've also got a website. So if you popped any UPC into any search engine, we'd be there and all our contact details are on there. So yeah, love if anyone has more questions or wants to know a little bit more about what we do, then absolutely get in touch.
Brilliant. Well, it'd be great to swing by another 6, 12 months and just see the development, especially given you say the sector's changing so much. But for now, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you.